is an unrehearsed program. The views expressed are those of the guests and not necessarily those of the producer. Today's topic:
The Deaths of Tyrants and the International Law in the Passion for Truth award-winning program.
Welcome to another edition of Passion for Truth. Are the changes in our international landscape going to stay permanent? General Pinochet was brought to justice for his crimes. Milosevic, Serbia's president, became the first head of the state to be charged with war crimes. Charles Taylor, Liberia's president, was handed over to the special court sitting in The Hague. Recently, Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death after being convicted of war crimes. The death of these tyrants has changed the international landscape, but the question is, does it act as a strong deterrent to the current dictators in the world? We have a distinguished panel: Fred Peterson, Defense and Counterterrorism Advisor, Senior Fellow at U.S. Freedom Foundation and Congressional Fellow; George Nestracek from management consulting firm Nestracek and Associates, former staff director for the U.S. House of Representatives. Mr. Nestracek is originally from Ukraine and has first-hand knowledge of consulting with the government of Ukraine and Russia on major policy issues. Dr. Amarjit Singh, Director, Voices for Freedom, also a columnist for several newspapers. Dr. Joseph Annunziato, with expertise on international affairs. As a former professor, Dr. Annunziato was an advisor to the Assistant Secretary of Defense on international issues. He was also a senior staff member at the White House. Welcome you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Starting with you, Joe, these tyrants, do you think they have changed the international law?
I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think so. I'm glad that they were tried and judged, but as my colleague was saying earlier, sic semper tyrannis, we will always have tyrants with us, I think, and there will always be people who rise to the top of power and want to retain it.
But no tyrant, Dr. Singh, could feel now safe from the crimes of humanity.
No, I think even let me talk about this week's UN Security Council resolution, which was on Myanmar's dictator, checking him, and Russia and China came together to veto it. So that in itself tells that a country which is holding a Nobel Prize winner captive for so many years is known for its worst human rights record, and still in the international arena there is support for that. So I think all the four cases which you have mentioned, maybe of Pinochet, Saddam Hussein and Milosevic and the other Liberian dictator, they all are. Still there is a good vibes around that we can bring to justice the tyrants, but as a matter of fact there is no international wave or international will at this stage, even amongst the five top powers, to follow what they are saying privately about one power. They'll come and support the other power as it suits their vested interests.
George, one thing stands out among all these dictators, which is that they all claim, these dictators claim, that human rights abuses were necessary to avoid the widening of the conflict, and consequently, but the judges did not buy their argument. And so, is that a good precedent?
Well, I think my general assessment from the examples you cited is that the existing double standard in the world still maintains, and that is right-wing dictators are bad, left-wing dictators are good, or at least they're tolerable, they're accepted. All the examples of tyrants being brought to justice are primarily from right-wing type of governments, where sooner or later vestiges of democratic processes overtake these characters. And there's certainly reinforcing forces from outside, from democratic countries, that tend to support that. On the left, you know, you don't see those kinds of things, because communists, generally when they take over, they dismantle all of the apparatus for change, democratic processes. So sooner or later you have revolts and revolutions and uprisings and bloodshed to remove these forces. You know, the Soviet Union obviously was a different kind of an example, but none of the transgressors from any of the Soviet states was ever brought to trial. So we don't really have a balance there that could say that there's some kind of permanent trend in the world against the rule of tyrants.
What do you say to his argument that there is lack of balance there, Fred?
I quite concur. I think it's evident, almost without exception, that those who convey the news and observe events tend to focus on the abuses of the right and tend to either ignore or actually idealize the abuses of the left. I think we have seen some significant events recently, and I think the execution of Saddam Hussein, in spite of the flaws, I believe, in the prosecution or the execution itself in detail, the substance will, I think, be resonant throughout the world, that it will make those dictators on the left or the right much less comfortable on their throne, and they will know that at some point justice did come to bear on a tyrant, and I think it will make them a little more uncomfortable, and it will be for the benefit of all.
But I think in the Pinochet's case, Pinochet was supported by America when he overthrew a democratically elected Marxist government in Chile. So over a period of 17 years of his rule, we were supporting him, and even after now his death, statement by our Foreign Office is very mild that those were bad days and how people have won this democracy and this, that. So I think it's not a sharp divide between the left and right when it comes to supporting. When we were supporting Pinochet, he was on our side of the aisle, and he overthrew a democratically elected government, no matter what was the worst condition economical of Chile at that time. But still the fact remains that we supported a system or a man who overthrew a democratically elected government in Chile.
While that is true, the government of Allende was supported broadly in the media, and Pinochet was broadly criticized in the media and by the popular culture. It is true that the government did support him. It is also true that the excesses and the rise to power of Allende was never thoroughly or even casually examined by the media, and allowed him to maintain an illegal, or at least an illegitimate hold on power. And then we question the ultimate ends of power.
I wanted to say that this discussion indicates to me that there is, in the characterization of who's a dictator and who is good or not good for the country, a lot depends on political perceptions. So if you agree with that dictator, I mean, Franco was a dictator for 30 years, and we really liked what he was doing for the most part, except for some Republican people in France and elsewhere. So that when you have international courts that are going to take some of these people to justice, as in the case with Saddam Hussein, if it wasn't for a powerful country like the United States, maybe he would not have been brought to justice. And who is to say that the United States, George Bush, or some other government that engages in human rights abuses should not be brought to trial? Who is going to take on that task, that initiative? So it depends on who's in control.
Yeah, and I think even looking at the democracy, look at the Palestinian territory, Hamas came victories there, or even in Lebanon and even in Algeria. So when there is even a democratic process and something happens which not suits us, we condemn whatever Hamas is doing, not supporting it, but I'm talking that there is not exact demarcation that here is dictatorship and here is democracy, and we will honor the decision of the people, those who do it democratically. Even then we put our foot down and we say it's not acceptable.
Let me have George in. Most of these dictators had hoped that a record of economic success and their dictatorial rule would enable them to stay in power. But people instead chose to restore democracy. So is the collective power of people play some role?
Well, certainly in the case of Pinochet, who stepped down
regardless of
in the face of the will of the people. But it's really all